And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, to the Esoteric Wellness Podcast, where we explore health and wellness from the deep, dark depths of the unknown, the hidden, the misunderstood, the misinterpreted, the misled, and the forgotten. Now, before we dive into this, I got to do my necessary disclaimer. We discuss health and wellness on this show, and I am not a licensed physician. Nothing within this show should be taken as medical advice. We hope to provide information so you can make more informed decisions about your health and wellness, but these decisions ultimately need to be made upon your own research in collaboration with your doctors. And also, we're going to talk about psychedelics once again today, and these are of a varying legality around the world, so it is listeners' responsibility to be aware of their local laws regarding these substances and any risk involved with pursuing psychedelics is, that's a risk you must be informed about and willing to take. So we are in no way advocating, suggesting, advising people to pursue the use of psychedelics on their own without, making that informed decision, doing your own research. So this is episode 3 now, trifecta. And today we're getting into psychedelics part 2. So a continuation of our conversation from last episode, where we kind of laid out the more scientific understanding of it, how psychedelics work, what is therapeutic use of psychedelics. We got into all that stuff. So really laid a good foundational understanding for folks to begin to talk about this subject. And today we're going to get into some of the more interesting stuff, I think. As far as a conversation goes anyway, it'll be a little more interesting. But I think the last episode was necessary so that we understand what we're talking about when we do talk about it. So anything you want to add to that?
I do want to add into the opening. We have ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and others. We are inclusive here.
Yes.
We are inclusive. No, and I think you're right. I think understanding what we're discussing from a point of what it really is and what it does and how it works is necessary before we get into the not boring stuff. Sorry.
Yeah. Some of that was a little boring, maybe a little dry, but again, I think it's very necessary to understand what we're talking about.
I agree. And like we, stated, people have a preconceived notion of what these things are. And I think going through that helps dismiss a lot of that and help you draw your own conclusions, good, bad, or indifferent, and to understand what we're really doing here. So sometimes you got to take the dry and the science with the fun, weird.
Yeah.
Which is what I'm here for. So
we definitely try to have a good balance of those. But
it's like me and you, dry and science and fun and weird.
Ouch.
Sorry.
But yeah, the point of the show is to, give people a good understanding of the science as well as the interesting aspects. So
it all goes together. It's the yin and the yang. So how are you this afternoon?
I am doing all right. I had a busy morning of working with chronic pain clients. So it's always sometimes an emotionally demanding part of what I do, but I love it. It's very, very rewarding.
It's just working with people. People can, I do hair, and I'm telling you, working with people all day, having different personalities every couple of hours can really take a toll on you. So
definitely.
Personal health, take care of yourself.
Exactly.
Do some grounding.
So today I wanted to start with just kind of a follow-up on the last episode. I was listening to it, and I don't feel we did a great job of really addressing what are the risks involved with psychedelics.
Easy with that we stuff. I'm just here for the ride.
Okay, I did a poor job. Um, but yeah, we touched on a lot of them. We talked about most of them, but we really didn't list them out altogether. Like these are the risks involved. And I wanted to just take a minute and do that here today.
Here's your dry portion of
Yes,
the
a bit
day.
of dry. Here we go. So obviously the legal risks that are involved, and this is dependent on where you live, obviously, but it's not still legal in most areas.
In the Midwest,
Yeah.
where
So
we hail.
you do stand a bit of risk if you get caught with this stuff, if you buy it from the wrong person or whatever. So those are there. Now, there's also some risks involved with drug interactions. Compared to other substances, very few, generally speaking, but there are some to be aware of. So if you are taking, like, say, opioid pain medications, for example, those are probably two things you don't want to mix together because both do suppress the nervous system, and you don't want to depress things too far to where like your heart stops or you stop breathing. That obviously wouldn't be a good thing.
Well, let's be honest, you probably don't want to be mixing anything with opioids.
Yes,
So
yes,
follow the directions, kids. Don't
exactly.
don't do that.
Common sense with any drugs. Don't mix things without being aware of what the risks are. And also MAO inhibitors or MAOIs. Um, Generally speaking, with psychedelics themselves aren't a risk, but with ayahuasca specifically or other forms in ways in which DMT is used are often combined with an MAO inhibitor to prolong the effects of it. So,
And we did touch base, I think, a bit on that last time, in discussing how some of those plants work together to do that specifically. So
right.
wild.
So you don't want to mix, if you're already taking an MAO inhibitor with more of that, that could actually lead to a lethal drug interaction. So something to be aware of.
I think there is a case of maybe more than one, but one I know of specifically with the quote unquote church in Florida that was using ayahuasca as part of their rituals. There was a gentleman down there who, whether he did not disclose he was taking these drugs or what, but during I think the ritual he did succumb to whatever it was doing to him, and there may have been more than one, but it does happen, folks. So
Yeah, that kind of points out another risk that wasn't even on my list is when you seek out practitioners to work with this stuff. A lot of people like fly down to South America to take ayahuasca, for example. You got to be careful about who you're working with. You need to research these folks, make sure they know what they're doing. Um, there's a lot of predation and stuff like that with, even things like sexual abuse and people being robbed while they're under the influence of these things. It's like
trafficking, all sorts of
you're really, if you're trusting someone to be basically in your care or in care of you while you're under the influence of these drugs, you got to make sure you trust these people because they can easily take advantage of you in that situation.
have a buddy system. if you're
Right.
if there's really that big of a concern, have a buddy system. It's like heavyweights, buddy.
Yeah. So
I know Courtney will get that
I've heard
reference.
countless stories of young people, flying down to South America to perform, participate in an ayahuasca ceremony, and they just, they have all their money robbed from them or they're sexually abused while they're under the influence of these drugs. And it's just terrible that
Or worse. I
people would
mean,
take advantage of that, something that's supposedly so sacred and, helpful and totally ruin it in that way. But that is a risk to be aware of.
all right.
Also, so the whole idea of this bad trip, right? We covered last episode that there's no real risk of going insane or dying from that, but it can be a traumatic experience. Don't get me wrong.
You're really bringing us down today.
We'll bring it back
Start.
up here in a
Okay.
minute. Give me a moment.
We're building steam.
But yeah, these experiences can be traumatic. I
Yeah.
mean, they can be full of intense fear and emotions like that. And It's not something to play around with. So when we talk about set and setting, this is why you want to put effort into making sure that's where it needs to be, because you don't want to have a traumatic experience, especially if you're coming to this stuff seeking to work through trauma. You could just kind of pile more trauma on top of that, and that's not what anybody wants.
I believed you actually shared a thing on your professional page there that it said something about the healing can be even more painful than the trauma itself. And that
Yeah,
does go with that. It really can be. To be confronted with all of that can be worse than what you were dealing with in the first place.
right, definitely. And there is also a risk with, if you have existing psychotic disorders like schizophrenia or sometimes bipolar, um, it can make those things worse, or kind of bring those more to the surface where they were more hidden before. Um, and I think that's common sense, but I did want to mention it. If you have schizophrenia, I would not suggest you play around with psychedelics.
Well, right there, I need to put in a disclaimer that common sense is not common
No, it's not.
anymore. Let's be honest. We work with people. It's not common. They need to maybe rework that name.
But like we said many times last episode, that is the list of risks. And you compare that to any medication you get, even over the counter, that's a short list of risks, right?
Mm. And yeah, overall,
Yeah.
using your brain is what
But
kind
with
of
anything, there's risks involved. And
sure.
we want everyone to be aware of what they are and be clear about, one, there are risks, and two, what are they and how do you deal with them? So that was my 5 minute, you know, kind of revisit of last episode. I just wanted to clear that up because I don't think we did a great job of it, or I didn't do a great
That's right.
job of it.
And we are still, I guess, learning to and how best to present the information. There's so much, and there's so much that we want to talk about and get into it. And sometimes, he may have that handy dandy little notebook over there with a rundown, but let's be honest. Anybody who knows you knows you can get on a tangent. And I myself, and we
Never.
can leave that in the dust. So
Never. If I didn't have this notebook over here, who knows where we would end up.
in some very strange and weird places, kids. I've been there many times, usually on the daily. Don't do it.
So yeah, today I wanted to get into the psychedelic experience. Okay, what happens during this experience? What kinds of things could you expect to see, to go through? And while every experience is unique and different, I can in no way fully encompass everything you might experience under psychedelics. But there are a lot of commonalities that I want to go through today that seem to be present most of the time when people take psychedelics. So it's kind of like it's a process, it starts on, you first take it, depending on the substance, it could take longer or shorter amounts of time to really start to feel the effects, right? But
Mhm.
very often the initial effects are almost like you just got a good buzz going, or you just feel a little good. You start, maybe get the giggles, laugh a little bit, you
Yeah.
just feel good, you feel happy. And when people take these things recreationally, I think that's most of the time what people are looking to get out of it. So, pretty much like any other mind or mood altering drug at that point, that's, you just feel good.
Well, and I think, and that's the nice thing about, psilocybin or the psychedelics we're discussing. You have a lot of your bodily autonomy left. Like you
Oh
can
yeah.
still get up and go pee if you have to, or, get a snack. Things may look a little fun on the way to do that. You might be peeing some rainbows, but you can still function.
Yeah. So again, depending greatly on the substance you've taken, that can be within minutes, that can be, half hour, maybe an hour, depending on what you took. But these are usually the first things you kind of notice with psychedelics. And, at first it's pretty mild, to be quite honest. It's not like, holy crap, what's going on yet. That'll come later.
It's a build. I think you just start noticing little things like, oh, what was that? It's not like a you get hit by a truck, it's a little things like, oh, well, that's fun.
Yeah, it's definitely a build. And that's kind of the next part is what's often called the come up or the build up. This is when, what you're noticing is coming on stronger and stronger. You're noticing new things like visual hallucinations, sound gets weird, time gets weird.
Mm.
Um, and usually at some point it becomes a little bit overwhelming. And it's like it goes from being a fun experience to, oh, this is not good.
We, we've just taken a corner, kids. Hold on.
It starts going a little beyond what you're comfortable with, in a lot of ways. And this is when I think it's almost like your body is trying to resist it. Now, I want to take some time and talk about, the kinds of things that are going on during this part of the experience. So, if you remember last episode, we talked about kind of what's going on in the brain, where you're having a lot of global connectivity. So parts of your brain are communicating with each other that normally aren't. So you hear a lot of, senses getting mixed up. Like you can hear colors or see sounds or feel sound. Like things are getting mixed up in that way. And it's very weird, and
It's
it
disorienting
is. It's quite strange.
because when you walk around every day with your five senses and this is how they work and this is what they do, and all of a sudden everything is like, Alice in Wonderland upside down, things are getting weird. It can be really cool, but it can be I think maybe off-putting in a way to some people because it's not what we're used to and
Yeah.
scary even.
So if you're not doing this in like a therapeutic setting with an eye mask and things like that, you still have your eyes open, looking around, a lot of visual effects. Things aren't looking right anymore. You see patterns where they weren't before. A lot of people report like things appear to melt and morph in shape and in appearance.
Or get big.
Yeah. Um, and if you're comfortable with this, you understand what's going on. It's not that scary, but I tell you what, if this is the first time you've done it or you don't understand what's happening or why, it can be scary as hell.
Well, like, let's be honest, we've all heard those stories of, when we were in high school, that one dude did it. I can actually specifically tell you a story I heard of a guy like who was out in the yard holding on to the grass because he was afraid he was going to fall off the earth
Mhm.
and was screaming about everything, breathing, and like you don't know what you're doing when you're in high school. This is why we're pushing so much to educate folks on this because when you can understand it, just like anything in life, when you understand it, it's not as scary.
Yeah,
You can control what's happening.
definitely. And it's why, a lot of like the psychedelic artwork and things like that, you see they're bright colors. They're not so like straight in lines and shapes, everything. Because when you're under the influence of these and you look at something like that, it all kind of starts to move and morph around and come together. It's very cool looking. But
Well, let's be honest, some of my favorite music came out of that time period.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
that is good music because you're tapping into stuff that you normally wouldn't, and you're hearing things and seeing things, and that's my favorite genre of music right there. So
So yeah, the music aspect, we talked about this last time with, in pretty much every therapeutic trial that's been done, there's been music played. And when you talk about wanting to, maximize your chances of a positive experience, music has a way of really directing the
It does.
experience. Like it gives you something to focus on. And I'll tell you what, you'll never listen to music the same way again
Absolutely not.
after that
When
experience. But
when you can listen to, and again, my music people here, if you can listen to I Am the Walrus by the Beatles and understand and hear every single part of the end of that song, you, you hear things a little different. And the music also directs how you hear it. The type of music you're
yeah,
listening to can really affect what the experience you have. So be conscientious of that. Like, listen, we love metal, you and I. You know, we can listen to some scary stuff. I don't know if I would recommend that. You know,
probably
just
not the
just
time.
no, no. Throw on some church music. Not even joking. Some of that choral crap you'd hear in the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
You would never hear that out of my mouth any other time except for this.
Yeah. And that brings me to like emotions are so much heightened during this part of the experience. Like, you know how music normally brings up emotions in people of some kind.
Well, that's what it's for.
It's going to be amplified so much. Like, so when you hear like strings music, for example, it usually brings up like feelings of sadness and you want to cry. And when you're on psychedelics, holy crap, you're going to feel it.
You, you may or may not sob,
You probably
speaking
will.
from
Yeah.
experience.
So, like a beautiful violin song, for example, could just bring tears to your eyes and make you feel such a level of sadness that you've never felt before. And it's like the emotion is so tied to what you're experiencing, and it's such a degree higher than you've probably ever felt before. So that's why if you don't really put forth the effort into creating a set and setting that's conducive to a positive experience, fear is an emotion and it will be amplified just as much. So you think things are scary normally, holy shit, when you're on psychedelics, fear is like, mm, it'll scare the shit out of you.
Education, kids.
Yeah.
Education.
And two, you got to understand not every experience is going to be positive, and every experience is kind of a mix of positive and negative. I would say every experience that I've had with psychedelics, there's been elements of fear involved. There's
I
been
agree.
elements of sadness involved. It's just part of the experience.
But there was also just pure beauty before that as well.
Right.
You experience something so emotional and beautiful and moving, and then you move into that. It's again balance. It's about balance.
And it's something that sticks with you too. Like
It does.
I can still to this day listen to a song that, really moved me during a psychedelic experience, and it will still bring tears to my eyes. There's nothing special about that song other than, it moved me in that moment to such an emotional degree that it still, you know, can do that to this day.
And I can say the same. It brings back the visions of what was happening and the emotions that were felt. And that's what music is for. Music is meant to move you and to hit those emotions. But when you can do something like this to really just heighten that, to really fully experience, and then in the same time listen to what your body is trying to tell you. So
Yeah, so I think music is an important tool to use, because I've tried it without music before, and it's hard telling where your mind's going to go.
the mind wanders, and
It sure as hell does.
depending on what's been weighing on your mind, whether you've been
Exactly.
stressed out at work or financials or something with your partner, or if it is anything that could potentially be negative. And let's be honest, we're humans, we all have that every single day. It may not be in the forefront of your mind, but it's in there and it'll find it. So you don't want to wander into those places. You want to guide, and music is a wonderful guide.
Yeah, and not to say you don't want to go to those places, but you don't want to go to those places if you're new to psychedelics.
You have to be prepared. You have to be
Right.
ready to deal with what you're gonna.
If this is something you've done several times, you know how to navigate that experience, then there's nothing wrong with turning the music off and seeing where you go. But I would never go into a psychedelic experience without having access to music if I needed it. Like,
And I'm one of those people that just doesn't like conflict and turmoil. So no, thank you.
it's all about your intention too. My intention with it is usually self understanding, self growth. And I think a big part of that is, you know, going to those dark places. But, you know, I'm I always have that music ready and available if it starts going somewhere I don't want to go or I'm not ready to go. Yeah,
Put on
put
a
the
happy
headphones
tune.
on and let the music take you. But this kind of leads to the next part of the experience, which is called the peak. So this is kind of the height of the experience. And tied to this part is this. So, like I said, it builds and builds and builds. Your body's kind of reacting like, oh, this isn't so good. We don't like this. And there's this overwhelming sense that you need to let go. And that point of letting go is almost always the peak. Okay. Where you finally accept what's happening. You're like, okay, because as you're coming up, it feels like you're dying. Okay. I can't paint that any other way. It feels you are convinced in that moment that this isn't good and I might not come back.
I can say that that point was absolutely terrifying. In that experience that I had, like I came out so, and you can tell I was sobbing. Like I was absolutely just a hot mess in that moment. And it is. It's different for everybody and how it works. But I mean, we kind of came to the same conclusion on
Yeah.
the feeling.
And I don't care how much you understand this going into it, you'll still feel it. You can't like tell yourself in that moment, like, oh, it's okay. This is normal. I mean, you're still feeling like you're dying. Even if you've done it 20 times before, you still go through this.
The brain has a way of doing it, man.
Yeah.
It puts it to you. Like I said, what I was listening to was waves crashing, and my brain turned it into this horrific storm that was I was going to die in this. Like that's,
Hmm.
it's got a way.
So, yeah, at that moment where you finally accept it, you let go, there's this like almost like a sudden release or something like that. It's like this is where it whisks you away into, this is always different for everybody, but it's like you're committed at that point. Um, you relinquish control of the situation in a lot of ways. And this is also where that ego dissolution or ego death happens. This is what you're letting go of, I think, in a lot of ways, is your sense of self, your connectedness to self. And at that point where you let go, this is where you come into that feeling of oneness with the universe, of connectedness with everything. And this transition, I think, is really the core of the experience. This is what really has such a lasting effect on people is,
I agree.
the experience might be 8-10 hours long, depending on what you took, but it's like this one moment in that experience is truly the essence of the healing capabilities of these substances.
It's that pivotal moment where you go from, the death and terrifying to, oh,
Right. And so after the peak, there's probably, a length of time, again, depending on what you took, that could be hours of where you're not fighting it anymore. You're fully immersed in it and it can't go any which way at this point. Um, it's often like a roller coaster in a way. It's ups and downs. There's periods of intense euphoria. There's periods of intense sadness. You're riding the emotional roller coaster at this point. And who knows what drives what direction you go here, but this is where you'll have a lot of these realizations, these epiphanies, if you will, about yourself, about your life, that kind of thing. And it kind of slowly fizzles out. They call it often like parachuting back down to reality. It's not like a sudden, you know, snap of the fingers and it's over. It's a slow come back down to reality. It slowly wears off over many hours, typically, for most substances. And then at some point, you're like back enough that you can rejoin reality, um, and come back to whatever space you're in. Take the blindfold off, turn the music off, and then there's usually an hour or two or more sometimes of it's called the afterglow, where you're still affected by it, but it's not greatly altering reality for you. You still feel like maybe a little bit euphoric in some ways. There's a lot of people report like a brain fog. You don't feel like you're all the way back yet, and that can actually linger for several days. And I think this is your brain, the neurons in your brain just kind of slowly starting to calm down.
They did a lot.
Yeah,
they need a break.
I tell you, you look at these brain scans that they've done on people under the influence of psychedelics. It's like your brain is lit
You
up.
light up like a Christmas tree.
It's lit up. It doesn't ever do that any other time. So,
and normally what you're doing something and it's just specific areas that respond to some sort of stimuli.
yeah.
No, you got the whole, the full Monty there, and it's going. So
And depending on how your experience went at this point, you might be struck with, immense shifts in perspective.
and that's for most people. I
Yeah,
would think that's the point.
massive, sudden understandings, realizations about, yourself or whatever.
Yep.
This might be a difficult time.
It can be a lot to digest. I mean, you
Yeah.
just went through something that if you've never done that before, you will never understand. And every emotion, you ran the gamut. And
Yeah.
to try to make sense of that afterward can take time.
So after you come out of this, you're going to be mentally exhausted, probably physically exhausted again, depending a lot on what substance you ingested. A lot of these are very hard on the body as well.
Well, like we discussed with the ayahuasca earlier.
Right.
I mean, the vomiting. I mean, you're literally and figuratively purging. And I mean, that's hours of just intense, physical and emotionalness on your body. So
Definitely. So I always tell people preparing for this, like, you don't want to have any obligations to do for like the next 3 days. You don't want to make important decisions in the next 3 days.
you're emotionally not available for that.
You need time to recover.
It's a good weekend thing.
Right. Because you may have some serious shit to deal with as well. You want to give yourself time to do that. You don't want to go to work the next day and be just totally devastated by this experience and have to go to work. Right.
Well, and I think the mind frame going into it as well, not necessarily just the after effects.
Oh, yeah.
You have to go into this with positivity. You have to really set those intentions, and because that sets it too.
Definitely. And so that kind of took us through the typical experience or the common elements of an experience anyway. As I can't say this enough, every experience is different. Every experience is unique. Every experience I've had has been, one of a kind. It never fails. So, and So much of it from an experiential level is so hard to describe with words. Like,
And that's where you and I differed, though. I come out.
true.
I think that depends on the person. I mean, I come out like diarrhea of the mouth, and you're just looking at me going, wow.
I think it was like 2 days before I could even say anything about it.
Nope, me. I'm like, I'm up like, all right, let's discuss this. And you're like, wait, what? I'm like, yeah, dude, we need to talk about this. And you're over there in your hole for a couple of days, taking it all in. And
You're looking at me like, tell me, tell me, tell me. And
you're like, I need a minute.
I don't even know how.
Yeah. And again, the difference I think between you and I was still weaning off medication that could also interfere and inhibit how I experienced it. Am I going to downplay and say the experience was not like, holy crap, life changing? No, absolutely it was. And, I'm curious to see what it would be like now that, any kind of the SSRIs or whatever are not there to block that. What a fool, would be. Because I saw you after. A little rough.
Yeah, you could say that. All right, that brings us to our first break. We will be back shortly.
Get a snack, buckle up. And welcome back from our first break. In the first section there, we went over, legalities and warnings and dangers and this and that's and what you typically would experience. So in our next bit, we're going to discuss the link to spirituality and how it's used with that. So there's science, man. You want to take it away?
Let's roll. So yeah, it's almost impossible not to link in many ways the psychedelic experience to the near-death experience. You look at any research, read any firsthand accounts of near-death experience, you cannot but help to notice the similarities.
Absolutely.
And to start with some science, there is a very good reason for this. So the psychedelic compound DMT is naturally created and stored in our brains.
It's one of my favorite fun facts.
And this DMT in a brain is released in massive amounts at the moment of death.
So it's like a comfort.
So we can go down all kinds of philosophical roads with that. But it is a fact that when you die, you have a psychedelic experience.
The brain is flooded with DMT.
Right.
So what does that look like?
So it would make perfect sense that a psychedelic experience is very similar to a near-death experience because it's literally the same thing chemically going on. Okay. And, why evolutionarily speaking does this happen? I don't know.
I think it comes down to it's a comfort. It is a defense mechanism in the brain where something, if you're dying, typically it's not a pleasant experience, evolutionary speaking. So your brain is giving you that last little pat on the way, like it's okay. You're getting your leg gnawed off by some extinct animal, but it's fine.
Yeah.
It's fine.
So I want to link this because it happens so often. It happened to me personally.
Me too.
Where these psychedelic experiences become very much spiritual or mystical experiences. They lead to like a religious experience for people.
Yes.
And that's weird. For a drug to do.
To put it blatantly, it's weird. Welcome to the podcast. It's weird.
But it happens so often. We can't ignore it.
Well,
What is going on?
and we discussed in the last episode, and you and I, with our experiences, I literally saw heaven.
Yeah,
Now, am I seeing what society has told me it looks like, or am I truly seeing something like it's that,
right.
what is this?
How much of it is being pieced together from prior knowledge in your
What you've
mind,
seen,
and
what you've
how
read.
much of it is really the essence of the experience
Hmm.
itself? Who knows?
So, what is
Um,
heaven? Ooh.
well, that's probably not for us to answer,
Ah.
but no, but it's like, so look at a typical near death
Hmm.
experience. You see bright
Hmm.
lights. Okay. You very often, this like a tunnel with a light at the end of it,
Yeah.
it's often described. I've seen these under
Yep.
psychedelics as well. And there's almost always described the like this urge to just go into the light or to let go,
Mine
right?
was, I wanted to stay right there. I was so comfortable and it was so welcoming and so beautiful. Like, and that was another point. I cry a lot, apparently. That was another point where I literally had tears because it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. And I'd never felt so comforted and warm. It
Mm-hmm.
was literally like clouds and the going up to the light, like legit what you would see when you think of that is what it was. And it was
Yeah.
the most beautiful feeling I've ever had. And it's no wonder when people have these near death experiences that they didn't want to come back. They're seeing whatever their afterlife is, and it's so beautiful and welcoming.
And there's often reports of seeing loved ones that have passed, or um, ancestors or things like this. And I didn't mention it earlier, but that is a common theme with psychedelic experiences. More so with certain compounds than others. DMT would be the example where that's more common. Like ayahuasca, they refer to it as mother ayahuasca. People don't so often see like this female entity during that experience, and how much of this is you know because they were set up to expect that, and then I don't know, but it's common enough that there's something going on there.
Things that make you go, hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is something that can happen with other substances as well, but DMT by far it's the most common with.
Well, they call it what, the God molecule
Yeah.
for a
So,
reason.
that happening in a near death experience then again makes sense, that we have that commonality. So, and the ways in which people change after near death experiences are extremely similar as well.
Hmm.
They often come back and they totally change their lives. They're a new different person. They see things differently.
A lot of
We
people
see
find
all
religion.
those we see all those same things with people that have a psychedelic experience. So what is it, the same thing? Is it different? I don't know.
We'll let you be
Makes you
the judge
wonder.
on that one.
It makes you wonder. But the whole spiritual aspect. So, these I think, and what they've determined somewhat in a lot of these clinical trials that have considered that question is this sense of the loss of self, this feeling of intense unity, connectedness. This is really the element that leads to this spiritual experience. And I can tell you firsthand, I believe it. When you feel that level of connectedness with everything, like this is part of it that's really hard to describe to someone who hasn't experienced it, but you really feel at one with the universe.
Hmm.
And that sounds cheesy and cliche, but
It's an oldie but a goodie. Use it.
that's the best way to describe it.
There's a connectedness that you get after it, and it just,
Yeah.
you know, and I think that's the big part with that dissolution, that ego death that you keep talking about, is it's breaking you down and realizing that it's not just about you. And there is so much more out there, that we all are connected. We're all fragile, and it helps you see that. And um everything becomes a lot more beautiful in a sense. You don't take things for granted as much. And, it really, I don't know how you could not have an experience and not come out thinking at least a little bit differently.
Yeah. And then when you frame this experience in the context of death,
Which is terrifying
it's easy to see how
for me.
that transition that happens, that loss of self, moving into this universal connectedness, consciousness, whatever you want to call it, could be seen or interpreted as an afterlife.
Mm-hmm.
What's beyond this realm, this life. Is it really beyond this realm or this life? We could argue about that all
And that's a
day,
whole nother
but
podcast.
I don't know that it really matters.
No.
But again, when it's bracketed within the context of death, it's easy to see how someone would come to that understanding.
Well, when you have that realization that you were so close to being at the end, and then
Right.
you come back and you see like, oh, there's more out there, or
Mhm.
whatever I experienced, it's gonna, like you said, you're gonna frame it a whole lot different than.
Right.
It's wild shit, man.
It is. It is. And I mentioned this last episode, but I was an atheist through and through. I didn't think there was meaning to any
Nope.
of this.
Had that conversation many a
I didn't
times.
think there was anything after this life. And that one experience changed my views on that.
And again, this is where a lot of people who will have a near-death experience come back, and all of a sudden they
Same
find
thing.
God, they
Yeah.
find Jesus and religion, and they put everything into it. Because I think that's the difference between doing this on your own, having an experience, versus being forced into it with a near-death experience. You can do with that what you will, but I mean, how many times do you hear people like, I died and came back and God saved me, I saw God?
Yeah.
That's,
No, you were just tripping balls.
well, you never know. Maybe here we go. Well, here in the beginning, here's all
Is
that.
there a difference? I don't know.
Maybe this is a portal for us to see beyond a veil. You never know. I mean, who are we to say?
Yeah.
Who says that doesn't open up that third eye in there, and you're not seeing into something else that's out there? We don't know. Is it cool as shit? Hell yeah, it is. But I mean,
Yeah. And for me personally, it's like, I still don't know.
no,
And I'm okay with that.
that's an agnostic now, honey.
But having that experience of this connectedness, this universal love or whatever it
Absolutely.
is, I can't help but to feel that there's something
Greater.
greater. Yeah, that's a good word for it, I guess. But you know, I this is just my personal beliefs.
Sure.
I don't know that they're accurate or anything like that, but I think our consciousness, the essence of consciousness, goes beyond our physical body, and this soup of connectedness that's out there is
In the
like
great beyond.
universal consciousness. That's where it comes from, and it's just like a reconnecting with source or whatever. I don't know. That's just what I've pieced together so far. But
Well, and I think that's what it comes down to, is having this experience and going through this. I think the main goal would be to get you thinking. whether it
Right.
be about who you are and what you've got going on, or thinking about your connectivity to the universe, or you're thinking. And it's taking you outside of your little box and your little world and your 9 to 5 and going home and doing it's getting you thinking and making you question and see the wonder of the world. And to me, that's what a lot of that is, seeing that, is there more? Could there be more? Let's discuss it. Those kinds of
Yeah.
things.
It definitely destroys your little personal bubble where you think you know everything.
That's no shit right there.
um, but that leads to a question, is this the source of religion? Is this the source of spirituality?
According to history, sounds like it could be.
Which came first,
Is it the chicken or the egg? Is it the
Right.
mushroom or the god?
I, I don't know, but I can say there's ample evidence that psychedelics has been with the human species for a long, long time. There's even a theory called the stone to ape theory, which proposes that early hominids, so this is before humans, they discovered psychedelic plants and fungus, and their consumption of these substances is what led to their evolution into modern day humans, that led to the extreme growth of the prefrontal cortex and the frontal lobes in the brain, and gave us this power of creativity, language, all this like ways of thinking that is much different from the rest of the animal world
Well,
in a
it
lot of
makes
ways.
sense because, like you said, you're looking at brain scans and there's areas of your brain being lit up that weren't before. So if you're some ape critter running around foraging and gnawing on whatever you can get your hands on, and you just happen to find something really groovy that day, and all of a sudden these parts of your brain are lighting up that have never been lit up before. Could you imagine this dude going back to his
You
buddies
guys got to try
and they're
this.
looking at him like, what the hell happened to you, Frank? Like, what did you do? Like, I mean, and it makes sense. You're working in areas of that brain that have never been touched.
Yeah.
Who says that?
So that's one theory that's out there, that these substances might be why we're human. Um,
All hail the great mushroom.
I don't know if there's any way to prove this, but it's an interesting concept to consider, nonetheless. But there is evidence that we've been using these psychedelic substances for a long, long time, and it does raise the question: is this the source of religion? Is this where a lot of these religious ideas, which are all very, very common in a lot of ways, yeah, there's differences, but when you break them down to the common elements, they're all basically the same. They're very similar. And again, very similar to a psychedelic experience. So, what's going on there? What drove what?
Let's take it back to the beginning. Apart from our hominid friends and gnawing on God knows what, what's our first?
Well, first, how far back does religion go? And as far as we could tell, it's always been there.
Like organized religion, or just folks
Not our
getting
modern day
together
version
worshiping things
of organized religion, no, but spirituality, spiritual beliefs, some kind of religious belief system,
sure,
has seemingly been in place with humans as long as we can tell. Even early, like what we would consider cavemen, had some type of religious belief system. They had some level of spirituality. And we can almost say the same, a little less certainly, with psychedelics, that it's always been there too. And I think in a big way, which we'll get into, their understanding of these substances and how to use them was way advanced compared to what we know today. But they found evidence of like wines and beers is probably the most common that contain, these weren't your everyday beer that you could buy in the store today. These were full of, psychedelic compounds of various different plants and animals, even that were mixed together in very complex ways. And this is, again, hinting at they had a very high level of understanding of this stuff and how it worked and how to mix them in certain ways. Because, oftentimes there's plants in these beers and wines that would kill you if you mess it up.
When we touched on that in the last episode, that it's what, three specific plants out of the entire frickin' rainforest,
Yeah.
where there's how many hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of variety of plants? Three
Yeah.
that had to be mixed together in a certain way.
Oh,
Three, or they'll kill you separately or do whatever, but they work together.
yeah. And where does that knowledge come from? I don't know, but it's been there a long, long time.
The folks in the rainforest said that what the plants told them.
Well, yeah, that's what they say.
Well,
But
I wouldn't take that lightly. I mean, it makes you go, huh.
just talking about what we have evidence of, I mean, you can look at like ancient Greece. So there was an ancient site in a town called Eleusis in Greece where there was they called them a mystery tradition going on there for over 2,000 years. And the center of this tradition was they had a wine that was called Kukion, or I'm probably butchering that word. But it was a drink, and they ingested this, and it brought on this experience. It brought, um, hallucinogenic visions and an experience, and they have found remnants of this substance, and it contains all kinds of stuff. Again, a lot of compounds that would kill you in the wrong amounts. And so this was all tied to the Greek god of Demeter, which was like the goddess of the harvest. And they think it was at least partly using LSD or LSD-like compounds from the fungus ergot, which typically grew on rye and barley.
Yeah, ergotism.
But again, if you get that wrong, it'll kill you.
Well, and I don't know, interjecting here, this is what I've been waiting for the whole time. The Salem witch trials.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Listen to him brushing me off. Ergotism. We'll get there. I'm just really excited for that.
Go down your witch tangent here. Go ahead.
Okay. So what, 1690s, they've been killing people that they've called witches for ages, and that's something that we can tie back to early on. They were making these brews, they were doing these things long before the Salem witch trials. Women held the key to that knowledge, and they would make their brews. There's a whole thing of the hats and the brooms and the cats, and I could go on all day about this crap, but don't you laugh at me. And so, in Salem at the time, everybody knows, oh, the young girls were saying they were being pinched and they were being possessed and they were seeing things, and then they were blaming folks in the community. And that's where our witch trials came from, the Salem witch trials, and people were stoned and pressed and hanged and fired and whatever they did to these people. And they think now that that was ergot in their harvest, because they had an extremely hot summer before they harvested, and then it was very damp after that. So that's the perfect conditions for ergot to grow. It's hot, it's wet, it's gross. Yeah. Things are going to grow. Well, you're eating this tainted whatever they made. Say your bread, your bread is tainted, and it actually messes with the vascular system. So it constricts. So you're going to feel tingling and pinching and pain in your body. Well, they said they were being pinched, and it causes hallucinations. It can cause all sorts of a slew of things, but when you really look at it, what these girls are saying they experienced sounds exactly like ergotism.
Yeah.
So we
Interesting.
killed all these people for rotten bread.
Ergotism, something that was quite common throughout the ages, that only modern, you know, technology has been able to totally, get rid of. Um, I think of like there was I can't remember what they called it, but there was an outbreak of where people would
Oh,
just start dancing
yeah, yeah.
and they would dance themselves to death.
Yep.
As crazy as that sounds, it really happened.
Some of my other favorite podcasts, I can't remember which one it was that did it. It might have been My Favorite Murder. I don't know. One of them, and that's how we drink. I don't know. But it was the dancing fever. It just like swept through. People would dance until they literally died, and
Right.
then it was gone.
I think some of that might be hysteria going on as well.
Well,
But
yeah,
yeah, you could see how psychedelic like effects and you didn't know what was going on or
sure.
why, you would think you were losing your fucking mind.
Well, it's definitely, and they have to be the right conditions. Like we said, it was really hot. It was really damp. I mean, that doesn't happen every year for the harvest, so they don't always have it in there. So it just seems to sweep through for whatever reason. Well, once that batch of harvest is gone, you're done.
It was also something that quite often killed people. They would make bread that was contaminated with this stuff, and there was too much of it, you would just
Hmm.
die. And that happened a lot. One of those things we don't ever hear about anymore, but
Thank
it was quite
goodness.
common. So anyway, yeah, the mysteries of Eleusis was using some kind of wine. They think ergot was a component of that, but they've also found like nightshades and other alkaloid containing plants that were within
Like
that
belladonna and mandrake.
again, you measure that wrong,
Oh yeah.
it's going to go very, very wrong. But they do have, most poisonous plants, if you dose it just right, you can have hallucinatory effects.
Well, what's that mushroom? The Mario mushroom. What's it called?
Amanita,
Amanita. Same thing. You'd have to have a lot of that. It'll kill you, but otherwise,
I think that's more of a myth than anything.
I don't know.
You'd have to eat way more than anyone's ever going to eat.
Don't take that challenge,
But
please.
yeah, but yeah, their level of knowledge with this stuff was far above and beyond
We said they were doing
what
what,
we have today.
2,000 years. I think they had some time to work out the kinks.
Right. No kidding.
It wasn't
And
like a weekend thing they were doing. This went on.
the mystery's there for much of it. Anybody who was anybody in the ancient Mediterranean went and did this. And was something you could only do once in your life.
So what, like all the cool kids go here?
Oh yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Any famous name from that time that you could find probably went there and
They
participated.
drank the Kool-Aid, huh?
Oh
Huh?
yeah. Oh yeah. And for something like that to carry on for that long, I mean, just think about how long 2,000 years really is for one tradition to remain stable.
Can we think of any traditions that have continuing? Good God. I haven't had my coffee today. Went on for 2,000 years today to think of, other than,
That's
religion.
rare. Right. And so there's that. There, and looking back even further, they found what, they're often referred to like graveyard beers, where it's beer that instead of wine, our beer making capability far preceded our wine making capability, apparently. But they found remnants of this as well that contained a cocktail of, mind altering substances. And they've been using this stuff for ages. And even so, they discovered a site in southeast Turkey called Göbekli
Oh
Tepe,
boy.
which has kind of upset the archaeological community because they've dated it pretty confidently to about 12,000 years old. Um, it was buried 12,000 years ago. Who knows how many years it was in use? And this predates the invention of civilization, supposedly, the invention of agriculture.
And yet we got beer.
And, we won't
Priorities.
go down the rabbit hole of what that means to archaeology and our understanding of our past.
Folks, you don't want it because I have heard the word Göbekli. How do you say it?
Göbekli
Göbekli Tepe. I have heard that phrase so many times in my household. Just go look it up yourself.
It upsets the entire story of our human history. So it's important. But in that site, they have found limestone, like big giant bowls. And they have found remnants in those bowls of beer.
You mean like a cauldron?
Sure, a cauldron.
That'll lead me to my next point.
So 12,000 years ago, before agriculture and civilization, which I think we can all agree is now wrong, but they were brewing beer.
Beer. Like I said, it's priorities. We haven't made the wheel. We haven't really got fire, but by God, we got beer.
So the studies on that substance was a little inconclusive. A few times they tested it, they did find things you wouldn't expect to be in modern beer, were mind-altering nature, and a few of the other studies didn't find any. But it's 12,000 years old. It's probably going to be pretty degraded.
A little degraded. Probably not giving you the best output there. Well, and if I may, can I go off on my tangent here?
Which one?
With the keepers of the brew.
We'll get patience.
Guys,
Patience.
Down.
We're coming up on the next break. We'll get into it after that. All right. So, yeah, the point is, this is not a new thing. It's been with the human species as long as we can tell. Maybe even right up from the beginning. It may even be why we're human. And that's hugely significant, I think.
So our takeaway from this segment is beer and psychedelics have made humans.
I tell you what, we need to find a way to recombine those things.
Challenge accepted. What are you doing this weekend? No.
I want to see a new beer with, psychedelics within it. You can have your beer and your psychedelics at the same time.
You just hit on a whole new demographic.
It's the next billion-dollar idea right there.
At least.
Jeez. But yeah, like I said, this isn't a new thing. We've been doing this for ages, for thousands, tens of thousands of years that we know of. And humans have been on this planet for, it keeps getting pushed back for, at least 300,000 years.
It's 4,000 depending on who you ask.
Well,
sorry, I had to take that jab.
We won't go there.
Uh-huh. We're not that podcast.
Yeah. But if it's been with us for that long, it probably played a pretty critical role in our culture and our species, in what we believe and what we think. It's got to play an important role if it's been there for that long. And you look at other things like more indigenous cultures, even modern day, of shamanism. This, shamans are using these mind-altering compound substances to connect with the spirit world and things like that, and heal people. Mm-hmm. And those are traditions that have been around a long, long time as well. And, if you took away these substances that have these effects, would it be the same? Would it still be there? I don't know. So the fact that today it's illegal to access these things, that they're so foundational to who we are.
You're taking away people's culture, people's beliefs and connectivity to their ancestors and their other worlds and
culture that we have in large part forgotten about.
Let's be honest, as white folks, we've stamped it out.
So brings us to our next break, and then the next segment we'll get into, I think, some of why that has happened, how that happened, when it happened, some of that fun information.
Yay. No
So
holding me back now.
We will see you soon. And welcome back. We've reached the halfway point. So I thought of, probably a million things that I didn't say over the break, of course. But, I also wanted to mention, so I've noticed, because this is an area of interest of mine, but a lot of the ancient esoteric teachings seem to describe psychedelic like experiences, and some of the more religious prophets throughout history, when they talk about their visions of God and things like that, sound along the same lines as well. So I wanted to touch on that a little bit. But as far as the ancient esoteric teachings, like, I'll use the Hermeticum as an example.
Can you explain to the lay folks what that is, please?
That would take too long. So these are the teachings of Hermes Trismegistus, which was...
Oh, yeah, that guy.
That was the ancient Greek name for him. And it even goes back further than that, to Egypt, as they refer to, or we refer to him now as God. I don't know if that's true or not, but Thoth or Tahoti.
My dude's been around for a minute.
So yeah, this is a collection of writings that's been around a long, long time. And this is actually what also sparked the Renaissance.
Ooh.
So a guy named Cosimo Medici in Florence had that text translated to Latin, so that modern day people had access to it at that time. And that's kind of what sparked this Renaissance, as we often call it, of the arts and knowledge and things like that. But anyway, in that, Hermes is kind of describing his initial vision with God. And I don't have it in front of me, but it sounds eerily familiar.
I think I've seen this before.
So I didn't get into this stuff until after I had done psychedelics, and I'm reading these, and it's like, it sure sounds like Hermes was tripping balls when he saw God. Just the way things are described, the things he sees, and other things like the Book of Enoch, for example.
It's another common discussion in my house.
Yeah. So this is even a precursor to the Bible. It's referred to in the Bible a couple times even. But anyway, he's again describing his initial encounters with God. And once again, sounds so familiar to me. It's like, I've seen this before. Where have I seen this before?
Where have I seen this ancient text before?
A psychedelic experience. And a book I'm reading right now, it's called A Course in Miracles. And this is a more modern text, but again, the same thing. It's describing, he calls it the holy instant. And it's like the instant we reconnect with God. And once again, it sounds very much like a psychedelic experience. It focuses a lot on like how time has no meaning anymore. And it's like, well, okay.
Been there, done that.
I've done that. And then you have stories in the Bible, like who was it that was talking to the burning bush? I should know this, but I can't think of it. Was it Moses?
Moses?
Yeah. I think it was Moses.
We're bad Christians.
Okay, he's talking to a burning bush. I could see that happening in a psychedelic experience. I've heard and seen things talk to me that shouldn't be talking to me.
It was Moses. He was tending to his flock.
But yeah, things like that. It's like, what was really going on there? What drove that? What facilitated these visions? It makes you wonder.
Well, when you're wandering around and you all of a sudden see an angel on fire in a bush,
And when
you might be tripping.
you put it into context, these ancient peoples, as we discussed earlier, psychedelics were a normal part of life. It's not like these things weren't known about. They were around, they had access to them, and they probably didn't have some government telling them that it was illegal to do so.
God forbid you think for yourself.
So I think the likelihood of someone like Moses having a psychedelic experience is pretty high. I mean, it was a normal part of life. So is a lot of our stories or things like that in religious beliefs also driven from psychedelic experiences. Now, this is going to piss some people off suggesting such a thing, but
It's just discussion.
right. I don't know this for sure, but I tell you what, having been through psychedelic experiences myself and then reading these religious spiritual texts, it's like, I've seen that very thing.
You saw the burning bush.
I've not seen a burning
Okay.
bush, but inanimate objects have talked to me.
Cats get real big.
Hmm.
And I mean, and that's the thing. I hope, people do hold their experiences and their beliefs and principles very dearly, and that's totally cool. But the whole point of this podcast is to just discuss things and the things that might be a little weird and out there and out your box. And, we're not saying that, oh God, you're wrong. No, it's just, it's discussion. And I think we're all adults. And if you've somehow found your way to this podcast, I have a feeling you're a little more open-minded and
Hopefully.
are, you know, into having a discussion about what could be and what might be, and you know just some weird shit, and that's what we're about. So you know we're not poo-pooing anybody's stuff, we're just chatting.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not saying any of it's wrong or it's just it's hard not to see the similarities and wonder, what's really going on there? What really drove that? And as we said before, even if it was driven by psychedelics, does it make it any less of a spiritual experience?
Absolutely not.
I
And like I
wouldn't
said
say so.
earlier, who says we're not tapping into something more? Who says that isn't opening that pathway for you to experience this other side or whatever? Maybe it's just a tool. Who
Yeah.
knows?
And I don't want to get in the habit or the place of saying, because there's so much of it out there, I feel I need to bring it up, that there are a lot of people out there who think psychedelics are sacred or should only be intended or used for spiritual purposes. And I don't want to get into that place where this is the only way they can be used. And if you're using them in any other way, you're wrong.
We're not those kind of people.
No, there's a lot of gatekeeping out there where my experience with it was spiritual, so yours has to be too. Um, if that's what you're looking for, great, it can be used for that. But if that's not what you're looking for, that's great too. These can be used in multiple different ways. So I don't know. I just, when I was first looking into doing integration coaching around this, I was doing a lot of looking around, seeing what other people were doing and how they were doing it. And there's so much gatekeeping. It's disgusting.
Don't be that guy. Don't be that guy. Let people enjoy it. Let people learn. Let people do their thing,
Yeah.
as long as it's in a safe and healthy way, because that's what we're all about. But yeah, dude, experience it and draw your own conclusions.
It in many ways is just the carrying on of the one of my main issues with religion is that it's like it's all about forcing you to believe and see things a specific way instead of finding it for yourself.
And that's the whole point of a psychedelic experience, is for you to learn it on your own. If I wanted somebody to tell me how to do it, I would go join the church, you know. That's what something I've always said.
Anyway.
I digress.
So I think this whole aspect of spirituality to being tied with psychedelics is fascinating. Um, I don't really know what it means, but
Do we have to?
no. Will we
Exactly.
ever? Probably not.
It's definitely a to each their own kind of a thing. You know, what does it mean to you? What do you take away
Yeah.
from it? You don't have to have the answer for everything.
And that's really the spiritual understanding I've come to as well, is like it's personal, it's unique. It's
As all religion and spirituality should be.
you know,
Personal.
I was raised in a Christian household. We were predominantly Roman Catholic, and so much of the problems I had with that, it was like was yeah, it has to be this way and that's it. And even though these ways were written down 2000 years ago and are no way relevant in the modern world anymore.
Well, let's be honest, Catholicism is about tradition, is it
Yeah,
not?
it
It
is.
is so this is how we do things. I mean, my God, you all just finally stopped doing it in Latin, mass in Latin, not that long ago.
Yeah.
So, and guess who doesn't speak a lick of Latin? This girl.
But anyway, I think it's very much unique to each individual and it's their journey to go on their own. No one should be pushing you in any direction down a certain path just because that's the path I went down, you know. Anyway, where do we go next?
Where do we go next? I think we were starting to lead into what religion maybe has done to psychedelics over the time, and how that has changed from being the root of people's religion to becoming the scourge.
So yeah, there's this interesting shift of psychedelics and religion used to go together.
Yeah.
You know, they were one and the same, I think, in a lot of ways.
And to many cultures, it still is.
To now it became like they became enemies.
How did we get there?
And you know, this may be something that's happened multiple times throughout history. I don't know, but how we kind of got to where things are today really starts with the rise of the Catholic Church.
Dun dun
You know,
dun.
that was kind of the first religion that gained power on a regional level, right?
Yeah, it wasn't just your little villages with your shaman and your thing.
Yeah.
It was across the board.
Yeah, because really before that, I mean, there were some others like Zoroastrianism was kind of the first real organized religion, but it was it was a little more limited in geographical area. And I think in some ways it still embraced things like psychedelics. But Catholicism was, you know, I think in many ways it was a platform for power and control.
No, you don't say.
But anyway, so going back to Eleusis in Greece, you know, the rise of Catholicism was what did away with that. It was the transition of Rome to Christianity. And that's what brought that to an end. And, you know, even you go back to early Christianity, and I think this tradition was still very much alive in early Christianity, even. You know, there was a whole Gnostic movement and that stuff, which, you know, it would take 2 episodes to explain all that, but they were very much holding on to these traditions of, you know, at that time it was more ancient Greek, you know, with wines associated with Dionysus and things like that. But
He was a jolly fella.
this mind altering experience to fuel this connection with God. And it wasn't until Catholicism became at such a height that it was like a political power that that became a dangerous idea.
And what is a threat to people in power? Other people thinking.
Yeah. So there's a fascinating book out there called The Immortality Key by Brian Murarescu. I'm probably butchering his name. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's literally to my left.
Yeah. Which, if you want a good book to read, this is a fascinating book. It goes into this whole story about so he's setting out to find evidence that the first communion or Eucharist was of a psychedelic nature. And again, this is probably going to piss people off, but I would like to say he found some ample evidence to suggest that early in the early days of Christianity, this is what was going on. This was, and it makes sense because it's just carrying on older traditions from previous belief systems.
Well, they
And
use incense still to this day.
when you look
Those
at how
were-
belief systems progress, that's how it works. It just slowly morphs into something new, but a lot of the old elements are still there. So anyway, they had been around for thousands of years before. They were still around at the rise of Christianity and still being used in a religious way. And so there was also a shift happening at that time to a more a patriarchal society set up
Yes.
where women were now having a very much secondary role in everything and men were in charge.
Well, and at the time, women were generally the keepers of the recipes, if you will, these secrets of how these brews were made and how, you know, and like we said, some of these combinations can be deadly. Well, these women knew how to do it.
Yeah, even going back into history before that, I mean, women played a more significant role in, it was dependent on the culture, but in some cultures, women were the ruling class.
That's right.
And I think in a lot more cultures, women were more in a leadership role as far as the spiritual leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Even still to this day in Asia, a lot of shamans are women in indigenous cultures. And that's something that was much, much more common the farther back you go. So,
well, when you have this rise of, like you said, kind of a patriarchy, when we don't want people questioning things, what do we get rid of? We get rid of psychedelics and we get rid of the women holding it.
well, I don't know if it was like, well, I think it was directed at both, but
yeah.
But directing it at one got rid of the other at the same time, you know?
Get rid of the women, that gets rid of the secrets.
Yeah.
There you go.
So where was I going?
Remember the tangents we talked about?
I'm trying not to.
When you were discussing how the patriarchy is rising in Christianity and the Catholic Church.
And even in early Christianity, women played a pivotal role.
Yes.
Many of the first established Christian churches were ran by women. Something that today would be very hard to believe.
Yeah.
But and then there's this whole story around Mary Magdalene, and the story of Jesus that has been in a lot of ways misinterpreted, misconstrued, rewritten in a lot of ways. If you read more some of the gospels that were left out of the Bible, and I think very intentionally, like Philip and Thomas, I think that could be wrong. Don't quote me on that, but Um, and this is some of the evidence that suggests that, like the Eucharist at the Last Supper, even that Jesus was giving to his apostles was a mind altering, ceremony.
Hey guys, I got something really cool for
And
you
that
today.
Mary Magdalene was the one who prepared it because she had the knowledge. Because it's something a man wouldn't have had because they didn't know how to make this stuff. And as I said, these were complex cocktails of many different compounds that you had to know what the fuck you were doing or you would kill everyone.
Like we said back in the day, they had that going on for 2000 years. So it sounds like they had it down to a
Right.
pretty good science.
Right. And I don't know if I mentioned this, but the traditions at El Usus were ran by women as well.
No, you did not throw that in.
Yeah. The
So
the high
yeah,
priestesses in El Usus were women.
for 2000 years, women were
Right.
running the party.
Right. So again, it wasn't until the church gained power or become a political power. They're like, I still don't know why, but they're like, oh, women need to go.
And we're still feeling a little bit of that today. Am I right? Yeah,
And this was the whole start of, I think, the persecution of witches.
absolutely.
Um, they weren't called witches then, but the
No,
rounding
and
up
there's
of,
a derivative of what that is. I believe it comes from, oh God, I just read this Latin. Basically, it's like healer.
yeah, I don't
And
remember what it is.
yeah, I was reading it to you the other day, but a lot of the root words of this comes from healer.
Right.
A lot of your witches and were green witches or like your hedge witches. They were herbalists. That's what witches were. They were healers. They were herbalists.
They
You
knew
didn't have
what plants
doctors.
worked and how much of it you had to use and what
Exactly.
you mixed it with.
You didn't have doctors
Right.
back in the day. So what did you have? You had your herbalist, you had your healer, and they knew how to do these things. They could take these plants that we have that so much of our common medicine, aspirin, digoxin, whatever, derive from, and they came from a plant and they knew how to
Yeah.
use them.
They were using the same stuff thousands of years ago.
Absolutely. And that's what so much of our modern medicine comes from. And, you know, they had the stuff that helped you on your daily, and then they had the good stuff. And with your bruise, they had, these flying ointments, they said. And sometimes they thought there were psychedelic properties in some of these ointments. And that's where riding the broom came from, as, you would put it on the broom and sit on this broom and they felt like they were flying. Or, the witch of what you see today, what we think of. And what do we think of? Pointy hats, brooms, cats. They all have their place in how they did these traditions, and those were taken and turned on their head by, originally it was the brew societies. You have societies, they were the men doing these things. Well, the women are over here brewing also. They would use hops and yeast and barley. They were literally making beer with other funsies
Not your
sometimes.
today's beer by any
Not your
means.
typical beer. This is not Bud Light, kids. Um, but these societies came about, and well, we got to push them out of that, and then it all goes together, and we've got to damn these women, and that's how what we think of as witches today came about, ugly. And these things, even the pointy hat was so when you're going through the market you could see, oh, there she is, that's the one over there with the good brew, because the hat stuck above everything else.
Yeah,
So
marketing.
it is. Listen, we're smart. What can I say? But where was I going with that? See, I get on my tangents too.
So yeah, I think it was a two-pronged attack on one, women who had knowledge that men didn't have, and they had power and influence because of that.
That's right. When you hold the key
Right.
and you're the only ones who hold the key,
And
that's intimidating. That's scary for other people.
two, they held the key, the secrets to these psychedelic brews, beers, wines, whatever,
Hmm.
that allowed people to have direct access to God. And when you're building a church, a religion that's now seeking political power and control.
Nobody else can have that access but them.
Right. They want to control that access. They want that access to be only given through the church, not something that people can access on the weekend at home. That's not what that's not conducive to having more power.
And right there, kids, that is power grabbing at its finest. Get rid of this. So you have to come to us.
So this rounding up of women who had this knowledge and killing them and locking them in prison, over hundreds of years has erased that knowledge. If anyone still has the knowledge, they're not telling anybody about it.
Well, even
I
up
hope
in,
that there's somebody out there who still knows how to do this and
there
has
are.
been carrying on. I'm
I'm
sure
sh-
there
I'm
is,
sure there are.
but this isn't something we have access to anymore. We have access to it in its pure forms still, but these concoctions, these cocktails that they were making with this stuff, it was just really mind-blowing at how they figured that out without killing themselves. um it's been lost because it was eradicated intentionally. So yeah, that book, The Immortality Key, digs into a lot of that stuff, and it's fascinating, and it's interesting how this has been carried on into modern day. um Even today in this country, why are psychedelics illegal? They're classified with they're given a classification that's given to compounds that are deemed dangerous because they're addictive and harmful. Psychedelics do not fit that description, as we've talked about. They're not addictive, they're not harmful. Why are they given that classification? What's the grounds that you know that's been done? And I think if you look back to the psychedelic um, surge in the 60s and 70s,
Revolution, baby.
what was happening to culture? It was a culture shock. People were waking up, people were thinking differently, people were challenging those in power.
Well, and like we said, when you come out of an experience, docile comes to mind. You have a whole way of thinking and the connectivity. You don't want to go to war and kill other people.
And I think in the US, that's what did it. Is
I
for the
absolutely
first time
believe
we
so.
had a war that our young people were not willing to go fight and die in,
Absolutely.
because they were awakened or had their eyes opened by these psychedelic compounds, and that was a threat to our government. And they saw that, they immediately noticed that, and they had to do something about it. So they made them all illegal, and they spread all this propaganda that they're dangerous, they'll kill you, that you'll have a bad trip and lose your mind. And it's on merely because they were a threat to the status quo.
If I may, real quick, as we were talking earlier, I had a thought and I had to look it up. The last person tried as a witch. Take a stab at what year it was.
Probably much more recent than you would think.
1944.
Yeah. Where was that?
Great Britain. Helen Duncan.
Okay.
She had seances and things like that. She was more what you, I guess, a clairvoyant.
That was at the height
She
of the spiritualist movement. Yeah.
absolutely, and you got a war too, but she had given, I believe, and don't quote me on this, she had given very sensitive information about with the war going on, about a ship that went missing, and she told the authorities or to whomever that it had went down or whatever had happened to it. She was giving things that only people on the inside would know, and they went after her.
It must be a witch.
Exactly. And she was tried for witchcraft in 1944, people, for God's sake.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Literally, how long, when did that start? Burning people at, I mean, well, Christianity started what, 30 AD? or BC.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the Catholicism really rose to power in about 400 AD.
Okay, well, 30 is where it kind of started. So we're talking 300 AD to 1944. Like not that long ago, like our grandparents. You this is insanity. But I just had to throw that little fun fact in there. Um, Poor Helen Duncan. So sorry, I totally derailed you there, but I just had to get that in.
No, that's crazy.
It makes you think, doesn't it? We're still persecuting people for being different, something that we're scared of. We don't understand. The woman was some sort of medium or clairvoyant. She had abilities.
It was,
And
I wonder how long before that someone had been tried. It's almost like, she was a threat to security, and that's just what they used.
could have been. I believe in the Americas, like in the United States, I believe it was the 1860s. I could be wrong.
Hmm.
But yeah, we've been using this for ages to put people down, and we just happen to keep going off of that time old up. She's a witch.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, that brings us to our next break, our last break. So we will be back shortly. All right, welcome back
Hey.
to the Esoteric Wellness Podcast, here for our last segment of the episode. So, as we were talking before, like the Catholic Church and those in power at the time kind of did their best to eradicate psychedelics off the face of the planet.
But guess what?
Well, obviously that didn't happen completely because we're here talking about it today. But we wanted to touch on kind of where and how, these traditions, these substances have survived since then. Because really in Europe, they disappeared. No one knew what psychedelics were.
Yeah.
I'm sure there were pockets of people that still knew and used them, but they weren't doing it out in the open by any means.
Well, like you asked earlier, with the women being in control and the knowledge and the power of making these, I am sure in there somewhere something was passed on
Oh, yeah.
from some little coven to another, and those probably held, and I think that's where a lot of our knowledge of plants and medicinal things along with that still lasts today.
Yeah.
So what other little secret societies have hung on to this information? I think that's what we're gonna dig into.
So what really catapulted modern day resurgence of psychedelics, knowledge of these and working with them was really the discovery of LSD by a guy named Hoffman. He was a Swiss chemist who kind of, literally by accident discovered this.
Yeah, he accidentally synthesized
And he was of the mind that he would try things on his own on himself to see what the effect was. And so it's a funny story. He tried this LSD he had made and then rode his bike home.
You mean he flew his bike home?
In hindsight was probably a poor decision. He did make it home, but it was a hell of a trip. Anyway, that discovery, he quickly shared this with other researchers, other scientists, and it found its way into like psychology and medicine. And there was a hell of a lot of research happening in the 50s and into the 60s with LSD. But also almost simultaneously, as long the same time, a guy named Wasson was traveling around Mexico, and he had heard about these mushrooms ceremonies that, created this profound mind altering experience. And one lady in particular, Maria Sabina, who was, I don't know if you'd call her a shaman or a spiritual leader. She was leading these ceremonies with these mushrooms, and he went there to experience it for himself, and she agreed to allow him to do so. And he had this profound, amazing experience with these mushrooms. And he brought some of them back to the States. And with him and some other folks, they worked at, developing ways to cultivate them. And, this is the origin of your modern magic mushrooms here in the United States. Most of the strains used today are descendants of that work. But going back further, where do these things survive? And, in the Americas, the indigenous tribes were using psychedelics throughout pretty much all of history. Going back to like the Aztecs, the Mayas, the Incas, they were all using psychedelics of some kind, usually mushrooms in the Americas.
Have you seen some of their artwork? Of course they have. That's some groovy shit.
And if you look closely, you'll notice in a lot of their artwork, there's mushrooms throughout it. They depict little mushrooms throughout their art. It if you look closely, it's there.
Well, and the vibrancy and
Right.
and the mashing of these animals and things like that. A lot of shit flies in those things. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Um, so as I said, in Europe, it had been pretty much eradicated. We lost knowledge of it. And, when the Spanish first arrived in the Americas, they found indigenous tribes that were actively using these substances to have spiritual experiences. It was the center of their religious beliefs and practices.
but we don't like
And,
that.
well, the Spanish were terrible about completely eradicating cultures that they came across anyway.
They weren't terrible. They were really good at it.
But these substances also terrified them and further drove that, drive to eradicate these cultures. And, these same beliefs that they brought over from Europe, they continued here in the Americas. And it's really a tragedy to see like how much of that culture has been lost.
It almost makes you think if that had continued on before, like you said, I mean, really the eradication of a lot of this, how society could be different today, how potentially peaceful and united, and who knows the advancements. I mean, my God, if we came from, like you said, the critters in the beginning stumbling upon this and all of a sudden, oh, human, like how far could we have developed? I mean, the things I know hindsight's always 2020, but the things to imagine what we could be.
Well, just imagine if Nixon had not,
Had his war on drugs.
made all these illegal. What just in that span of time, the short span of time, what research could have been continued and done? I mean, look at just what's happening in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
I mean, where would we be today?
Huge names like, Johns Hopkins and all these different hospitals, making strides. And especially with like, the VA and all these issues.
We might be at a point today, if that hadn't happened, where your family doctor could write you a prescription for psilocybin to cure your depression. Or you could go to a clinic in every town and have a psychedelic assisted therapy session. Like
Oh, what a world.
how much different would things be? But
Can you hear all the pearls that are being clutched right now? How dare you?
yeah. Anyway,
Devil's work.
so some other areas where this has survived, definitely survived in Asia.
Oh yeah.
I think I mentioned this once before. There was an ancient drink in India called soma, which
Yes.
was a concoction of cannabis and amanita mushrooms and probably several other things. And those traditions for the most part, survived throughout time in one way or another. Um, and it's definitely not something that's well recorded or documented, but in Africa, a lot of tribes use similar substances in similar ways.
But that
Um,
little amanita mushrooms really made its way through history and cultures, hasn't it?
yeah, how so?
Well, no, we were talking earlier, the Vikings. We're starting at what, like nine when the Vikings were around. And that's
900,
where,
yeah.
yeah, huh? 900, 900, whatever. There was a nine in it. I am not a numbers person. I'm just here to talk and be funny. Anyway, um, the Vikings, though, they would do a concoction with that little amanita mushroom along with some other things. I don't know off the top of my head, but some other plants they would do. Uh,
Probably a very complex
there was like
mixture of
something with
things like
the
everything else.
inhibitor.
Yeah.
They would use a plant that was the inhibitor. There was a few different things, and they all worked together to get the most effect. Well, then they would mix it up with some animal fat and slather it on their bodies. So when these Vikings would go to battle, they would have this euphoric sense. First of all, it made them very agitated, very aggressive. This combination of these plants and such, get them all agitated, get them all worked up. But it also gave them this like feeling, this euphoric feeling that they were huge. Like it made them literally
There's
feel
a
like they
word
were.
for that. I can't remember it.
It was like this god um complex that these Vikings had. And I think that's where a lot of the, you get these depictions of these gigantic Vikings
Hmm.
because they literally saw themselves as huge. They would look down over the battlefield and see these tiny little, you know, little Romans or whatever they were going after. I don't know. And they were so agitated and so worked up. And they also I don't think they felt pain like an average person going into battle would because of these substances. So they would just like tear down
Yeah.
these dudes. And that's where Berserker came from. So they were like basically losing their shit on their enemies and having a blast doing it. They're all wound up and going to town, but that little mushroom was a big part of it, along with some other
So
plants.
some video game developer at Nintendo
Ah,
apparently knew about this mushroom.
yes.
In Super Mario, you
Eat the little
get
red mushroom.
the white and red mushroom and you
Yeah.
get
You get
bigger.
bigger.
Hmm.
Exactly. And yep, that was the next thing. It's so funny, like these Easter eggs in your everyday life that come back to real things. But yeah, so these Vikings would go out and lose their shit on everybody. And let's be honest, they did some serious, you know, conquering and exploration in their days as well. And a lot of that, psychedelics had a big part in that as well.
Yeah, that was kind of before
Yeah.
the church eradicated it from Europe, but interesting example.
Yeah. That's a fun fact that I like. Gigantic Vikings mowing people down.
But looking at that mushroom specifically, it's indigenous to like Russia and kind of Central Asia. And that mushroom's been used by a lot of the indigenous tribes for, as long as we know.
And I think that also helped with the survivability of what a lot of these people and their cultures and their beliefs did, because some of these things are on the fringe of society. And like you said, most of Europe got taken out, but it was still elsewhere. And I think these little pockets and peoples, and they hid that and they kept it. So
Yeah.
especially off in Russia, depending on how far up you're going, nobody wants to go up there.
Siberia.
Yeah, a little
Yeah.
little chilly.
Yeah. So you know, I don't think it'll ever totally go away, even no matter how much some people in power might want it to, because it means so much to so many people that they're going to fight to keep it. They're going to fight to hold on to it. They're going to fight to retain that knowledge and, pass it on to other people. And, yeah, we've lost a ton of knowledge, a ton of understanding of especially like I said, these complex combinations of different compounds and plants. And, you know, that's a level of understanding I don't know if we'll ever get back. And that's probably the product of thousands and thousands of years of, messing around with these things, experimenting, trying different mixtures and learning what works and what doesn't. That would take so long to rediscover.
When I think nowadays, especially I think like our, millennial Gen Z kids, you know, we're the adults now and we're trying to, I think, get back to a simpler way. You see a lot of people doing their urban gardens and things like that and more holistic, clean ways. And, if that includes your medicine and a way of thinking, look what, like we said, a lot of these they're doing trials and studies on bringing these hallucinogenics and things back and using them in a positive way. And I think we're going to see some serious changes because this next group of people coming up want to see a simpler, cut the bullshit, kind of a thing. And I think that's going to help a lot.
Well, given the direction things are heading, if nothing changes, mental health is declining rapidly for
Yeah.
most people. And here we have something that provides an answer to that, with some use or regular use of psychedelics, you can live in this modern world and not have mental health problems.
No, maybe we just need to rethink how this
Well,
modern world
that's
is.
that's a whole nother discussion.
That's a whole can of
But
worms. Yeah.
we have this amazing substance that can bring so much relief in such a powerful way to so many people struggling right now. And to do it without the side effects, without having to take it every day for the rest of your life with side effects, and to have it so profoundly affect so many other areas of your life, like, why the hell aren't we doing that? How could we not?
Because
How could we know what we know now and ignore it?
when you cure people or have something that can grow out of the ground, it doesn't make them money.
Well, this is a problem, but
It doesn't make the
but
people empower money.
I
And it
think
makes you think,
there will still be ways to make money. They can synthesize the compounds. So most of these clinical trials using psilocybin, for example, it's a synthetic formulation of psilocybin. It's a pure psilocybin. They're not giving them mushrooms. So there's ways to make money there. Pharmaceutical companies could still manufacture these chemicals. They're not going to be in their natural form, and I don't think that really matters.
but let's be honest, I'm gonna poke my toe into that rabbit hole a little bit. Why did the church back in the day want to eradicate this? Why did during the time of the 50s and 60s and things like that, during wartime, did we want to press so hard on eradicating these things? Because it makes people think and question.
Yeah,
Can't
we
have
we
that.
can be all into the conspiracy
I
theories.
love a good conspiracy theory.
There is something to people who are not well are easier to control, easier to manipulate. And when you can use a drug that makes you see things clearly, makes you question things, makes you challenge the status quo. Yeah, that's potentially a threat to those holding the current status quo.
Absolutely.
But I also think that things are getting to such a bad degree that the status quo is being threatened either way.
So something's got to happen
That,
one way or another.
right. if things don't get better, it gets to a point where eventually there's a revolution and we demand change. So it's like they don't want it to get that bad, but they also don't want to get it so good to a degree where, well, we don't need you anymore anyway.
Somebody's got to shit or get off the pot.
Yeah.
So something's got to give. Damn, we got deep.
So I think there's so much momentum with psychedelics right now that it's not going to go anywhere unless there's some, it would take something really negative to happen to prompt like the government to step in again and say, no, no, we're shutting this down.
Like another giant Timothy Leary. He had good ideas, but he went about it the wrong way. You start doing that kind of shit,
Because
and they're going to turn you down.
For a politician right now to step up and suggest that would be probably, kill their career.
Oh, it's political suicide.
There would have to be something really significant happen to justify that, I think.
Only time will tell at this point. We have to just educate yourself, man. That's the big one. Educate and learn. And that way, if things do come at you kind of sideways, you can be like, no, that ain't right. That's the best tool for you. And so if things potentially, hopefully do change in the future, people won't be losing their shit. And, you can be prepared for that. So,
yeah. And two, we keep finding new ways to access these psychedelic compounds. And there are a multitude of ways out there that are perfectly legal because, laws are slow to change. So it's like as you find a new source, it takes a long time for the law to catch up.
Government's not quick about shit.
So yeah, while your more traditional sources are illegal, there's still other sources out there that are not as well known about, fully accessible legally. You can buy them openly online, whatever. And there's always going to be ways to access it.
Can't keep us down, man.
Oh. And as I've gotten into learning about this stuff, it really is. There's so many sources of it out there. And many of them are, probably growing around you right now, and you don't even know it.
And again, what's been our keyword? Education. Learn. Look shit up.
Yeah. Like one I learned about the other day was mulberries. So you eat mulberries that are not ripe or the leaves or the actual twigs. Now, I wouldn't advocate this because it's a terrible experience, but they do have hallucinogenic effects.
But it's not a pleasant one.
They also very much stimulate your nervous system and you feel like you're having a panic attack the whole time. So probably not something you want to go out and do.
There's probably more fun things to go find than that one. Good Lord.
But I'm sure with some level of knowledge of chemistry, you might be able to pull out the good parts and separate the bad.
My God, high school was so long ago. I don't want to even think about chemistry.
That's the level of knowledge that we've lost, how to pull apart what you want and don't want.
See, if you crusty ass men wouldn't have killed all the witches, we would still know these things. But no.
Yeah. Yeah, I know.
That was my feminist tangent, sorry.
But yeah, I'm excited to see where it goes. Like I said, I don't think it's going to disappear unless something major.
Well, considering it's been since the dawn of man, there has been some sort of something. And here we are. I feel like it's going to hang around no matter what kind of restrictions are put on it. But I don't know. Our government likes to restrict a whole lot of things.
Throw something else out that's just totally off the wall. But there's another theory out there that like psilocybin mushrooms, for example, fungus is just weird in general.
Absolutely.
Like it's like somewhere between plants and animals is its own thing, but it's just weird. But there's a theory that, fungus was brought here from outer space. So
I love this.
this whole idea is called panspermia. So it's like
Spermia.
panspermia.
Well, all I heard was sperm. I got
Yeah, you
distracted.
heard sperm, you
I
got distracted.
did.
Panspermia. So the idea that life has come here from elsewhere. And there's also theories that all life on Earth came from elsewhere. But the the whole kingdom of fungus came from outer space on a comet or whatever. And these psychoactive compounds found in so many types of fungus are like some alien technology trying to communicate with us or connect us with where we come from. I don't know, but this can lead to all kinds of weird, wild ideas and suggestions. And it's like, what if?
It always comes back to aliens, doesn't it? It always comes back to aliens.
Sorry, I brought it back to aliens.
Nope,
I was
that's
running
fine.
out of time. I had to do it.
It's fine. It's fine. Listen, if it's not aliens or Bigfoot or God, who cares? Let's just worship the mushroom and be done with it.
But yeah, can't help but to wonder, is that where this whole idea of spirituality, meaning in life came from?
The aliens?
These experiences that we're describing, or the alien.
They came from the aliens. No, it just, like I said, the whole point of this is to get you thinking, to discuss, and if it rolls around in your brain for a little bit and makes you pop up with some new, and so be it.
Regardless of whatever the truth might be, we can't deny that these experiences are life changing. They are profound. They are wild. I mean, there's nothing else like it that I know of. I mean, there's no other type of experience out there that you can have that can so profoundly change you at such a deep level.
Well, and it's obviously something that's been so important that it's been going on. Like you said, it was 2,000 years at that one place, man. Like this
Yeah,
is, it held on. So it is something that is important. And we should try our best to understand it.
definitely, definitely. And I know we had a pretty interesting conversation today. And again, I just want to highlight, they're as amazing of an experience as these substances can produce. There are risks involved. I just want to bring that up one more time.
And again, educate yourself.
Yes, because these are not things to be played around with. You can have fun with them. Don't get me wrong, if you know what you're doing. But do your research, learn about these things, and then, yeah, change your life with them. Get better with them, heal with them, find spirituality with them,
Learn.
whatever your intentions may be. But at least know what you're doing before you go into it.
Take the little alien mushroom and learn something. Connect with the universe, man.
Because while you can heal yourself with these, you can help yourself. You can open your mind. You can also traumatize the hell out of yourself.
Yeah. Get very sick. You could die if you're not, on certain things. So just be smart.
So hopefully we've given you enough information to at least start learning about these. Maybe we've interested you enough to learn about these.
You got something in there to chew on. Let's be honest. 2 hours of us rambling on and shit. You got to find something interesting.
And I don't know if we'll do another episode on psychedelics or not. I don't know what else we would talk about.
Unless we had, if people who are listening have had their own experiences and wanted to like write in, and we could keep it completely anonymous. We could discuss what their experiences were, what their trip was like, and maybe discuss the commonalities between what we've heard, what we've experienced, and what they've experienced. So
that would be interesting to hear some real life examples of, not just the psychedelic experience and like what they saw, or
sure.
I don't know. There's so much of that out there that I find it kind of irritating, because in a lot of ways, I think you're setting people up for failure
If they don't have something similar.
Right. You're setting
Sure.
expectations that are not realistic, because like I said so many times, every experience is unique.
And absolutely.
Some of them suck.
Yep.
But they're still profound.
Yep.
So when people just talk about, oh, I saw all this crazy stuff and I did this and I did that, it's like, yeah, that's great, but you're kind of missing the point.
Well, I'd get like real pissed when you're over here talking about like the colors and this and that. And I'm like, yeah, ain't happening.
Right.
Like,
And so when you
like real mad at you.
When you go to do it and don't have that much of an amazing visual experience,
sure,
you feel let down. You feel disappointed.
I was a lot of auditory. Like that was, music is such a large part of my life anyway.
But I would be more interested in hearing like real life examples of how it improved their lives, how it changed them.
Sure.
How it changed how they looked at, everything, whatever.
Maybe the highlights of what their experiences was and how they took that and applied it.
Yeah. Definitely. That would be interesting.
Whatever. I don't know. I just want people to write in and talk to us and tell us things. tell us if we suck. I don't know.
One of our 10 listeners out there.
Hey, that's okay. We appreciate each and every one of you, no matter how few or so many. If it weren't for you guys, we would just be sitting here talking to each other. And let's be honest, I can listen to this shit at home. He rambles. So
never.
Somebody else has to suffer along with me. I say that with so much love, honey.
I'm sure.
I do. Beglia
You're one of the few people in the world that listen to my rambles.
Because sometimes I don't have a choice.
Oh, well.
Anyway.
Well, that brings us to the end of the show. Again, if you do have personal experiences of your own that you want to share, or maybe even come on the show if you're local and talk about those, you can reach us at esoteric wellness podcast at gmail.com. Send us an email. Again, if you don't want me to read your message on the show, please tell me that, or I probably will, because
we can leave a name off.
Excited. Oh, we got our first email.
And then at the very bottom, oh shit.
And if you want to reach out to me, work with me as a coach, and again, I offer coaching around psychedelic integration, chronic pain recovery, and health and wellness coaching. You can find me at my website, kylebonbreak.com. And I do sessions online, so you don't have to be local by any means. You can be anywhere in the world. And thanks for listening. And it's been a wild ride so far, and I'm looking forward to where it goes next.
And just remember, stay safe, be kind, and stay weird.
Stay weird. That we will.
Yeah.
We will see you next time. Thanks for listening. We love you guys. See you soon.
Bye.